Were you ever taught those cooking tricks from your American grandmother that made the kitchen feel like magic? These old-fashioned tricks stretched meals, saved money, and kept families fed with love and thrift. If they worked so well then, why not today? Celery leaf soup starter was one of those quiet little tricks my grandmother swore by in her kitchen, and I never realized how clever it was until I started cooking on my own. Most people threw the leaves away, thinking they were bitter or useless, but to her, they were the heart of the celery plant. She would carefully chop them and toss them into broth, soups, or stews, and suddenly the whole pot had this deeper flavor that tasted like it had been simmering for hours. It was thrift in the purest sense because nothing went to waste and the savings added up when every penny mattered. I can still see her rinsing the leaves under the faucet, humming, before dropping them in with whatever else she had cooking that night. Sometimes she dried them on a paper bag in the corner and used them like an herb when winter came. It was not fancy or glamorous, but it kept food tasting alive when rationing or tight money meant meals could get dull. To this day, whenever I smell those leaves hitting hot broth, I think of her ladling soup and telling me you never throw away the good stuff. Saving pie-filling syrup was another kitchen hack my grandmother relied on, one of those things that made me laugh as a child but makes sense to me now. After she opened a can of peaches or pears, she never poured the syrup down the drain. Instead, she saved it in a jar, and it became the sweetener for pancakes, biscuits, or even a quick gelatin dessert. She said sugar was too expensive to waste, so why not use the liquid that already carried the fruit flavor? When she poured it over pancakes sizzling from the griddle, it felt like we were having something special, even though it cost nothing extra. On warm afternoons, she would mix the syrup with water, making a drink that reminded her of summers in her childhood. It was not only about frugality, but also about making sure nothing in the kitchen went unused. Looking back, it was genius, because it stretched resources and taught everyone in the family to look at food differently. To this day, I sometimes buy canned fruit just to remember the taste of syrup poured over hotcakes the way she used to serve them. Salted apple preservation was one of those odd lessons that seemed strange until you saw the results. My grandmother would slice apples for a pie or cobbler and sprinkle just a light dusting of salt before baking them. At first, I thought she was ruining dessert, but the salt kept the apples from turning brown and brought out their sweetness once they cooked. It was a method that saved her from wasting fruit, especially if apples were a little bruised or not perfectly fresh. She always said salt was cheaper than sugar, and you could make an apple stretch further if you learned how to keep it from spoiling. Watching her prepare pies this way was a reminder of how careful people had to be when money was tight and produce had to last. The salted apples would bake into golden slices that tasted far better than I expected, each bite sweet with just a hint of sharpness. She would laugh when she saw my surprise, as if she knew she had passed on a secret that had been in the family for generations. Salted apple preservation was a quiet triumph of thrift and taste in her kitchen. The eggshell calcium trick was one of the simplest yet strangest things I ever saw my grandmother do, and it stuck with me. Instead of throwing away eggshells, she would crush them by hand or with the bottom of a jar, turning them into little flakes. Some days she stirred them into the garden soil, claiming it gave the plants strength and made the tomatoes grow bigger. Other days she dropped them into the pot when she boiled coffee, saying it softened the bitterness and gave the drink a smoother taste. As a child, I wrinkled my nose at the thought of drinking coffee with eggshells in it, but I admit it worked. She swore by the minerals in the shells, telling me nothing in nature should be wasted if it still had life to give. It was not about fancy supplements or packaged goods. It was about using what you already had in the house. Looking back, I see how forward-thinking it really was, recycling calcium before the word recycling was even common. The eggshell calcium trick was just one more way she proved wisdom lived in the small, ordinary choices she made every day. The string bean needle test was one of those everyday lessons that carried more weight than it seemed. My grandmother never trusted a store label or a neighbor's claim about freshness. She trusted her hands. She would pick up a bean, bend it gently, and listen for the snap. If it broke clean, she said it was worth cooking. If it bent instead, she said it was tired and not worth the trouble. She made me practice it too, teaching me that food was about senses, not just recipes. The sound of a crisp bean breaking was, to her, the sound of money well spent and good meals ahead. When she cooked them after testing, they always had that bright, fresh flavor that spoke of care and patience. It was a small ritual, but it made her feel in control of what she put on the table, even when choices were limited. She laughed at the idea of wasting time on beans that would turn mushy. The string bean needle test taught me that even simple vegetables deserved respect, and it showed how experience in the kitchen could be sharper than any knife. Vinegar in pie crust dough was one of those tricks my grandmother passed down like a family secret, even though plenty of old cooks knew it. She would add just a spoonful of vinegar to the dough, and somehow the crust turned out flakier, softer, and easier to roll. As a child, I thought vinegar was only for pickles or salad, but here it was making pie taste better. She explained that vinegar kept the gluten from toughening up, though she never used words like that. She just said it kept the dough from fighting you. When she baked, the whole house smelled warm and buttery, and the crust came out perfect every single time. Watching her work the dough with calm hands and that little splash of vinegar showed me how tradition and science mixed without anyone naming it. It also meant she never wasted ingredients, since tough crusts often meant ruined pies and disappointed faces. To her, vinegar was cheaper than throwing away a dessert. Every time I bite into a flaky crust today, I remember that vinegar was the hidden hand behind it, proof that small choices carried big rewards. The clothespin dough roller was another one of those clever makeshift solutions that made me smile when I got older. My grandmother did not always have the fancy tools for cooking, but she never let that stop her. She would grab a simple wooden clothespin, clean it carefully, and use it to roll out noodles or dumpling dough. Watching her work with it was a reminder that the kitchen was more about creativity than equipment. She showed me that if you knew how to improvise, you could always find a way to feed your family. Sometimes the dough would stick, and she would laugh, flour dusting her apron as she shook it off and tried again. It made cooking look like play, and it reminded everyone around that solutions were always closer than they seemed. That clothespin, just an ordinary household item, became part of countless meals, stretching flour and water into comforting bowls of noodles or dumplings. To me, it symbolized resilience and ingenuity, proof that the best tools are the ones you already have in your hands. The cold water cornbread drop was one of those tricks that sounded backwards until you tasted it. Most people would heat the skillet first, but my grandmother swore that dropping the batter into cold cast iron gave you a thicker, heartier crust. She wanted cornbread that could hold up against beans, greens, or stews, not something that crumbled apart too quickly. The cold skillet slowed the cooking just enough to build up that tough outer layer while keeping the inside soft. As a child, I watched her pour the batter, heard the silence instead of the usual sizzle, and wondered if she had made a mistake. Then, when it came out golden and dense, she cut it into wedges and proved her point. The flavor was the same, but the texture had its own personality, stronger and more filling. It was cornbread built to last through supper and maybe even breakfast the next day. The cold water cornbread drop was her way of reminding us that different did not mean wrong, and sometimes it even meant better. Every bite was proof that tradition can still surprise you. The grated raw potato thickener was a discovery that made soups and stews hearty without costing much. Instead of buying flour or cornstarch, my grandmother would grate a potato directly into the pot. As it cooked, the starch released slowly, giving body to the broth and making it feel like a meal instead of a thin starter. Watching her shred the potato on a box grater, steam rising from the pot beside her, was like a lesson in quiet efficiency. It amazed me how something so plain could transform a whole dish. The soup would turn creamy, the flavors blending together in a way that seemed richer than before. She often said potatoes were the poor man's secret because they could stretch anything. And she was right. One raw potato could make a pot feed twice as many mouths. This was not about show or fancy cooking. It was about survival and comfort in one ladle. Even now, when I see soup thickening, I can picture her hands moving quickly, grating away, saving money and filling bowls at the same time. The grated raw potato thickener was a trick born of need, but remembered for taste. Soap saver cheesecloth bags were one of those multi-purpose tools my grandmother kept in her kitchen, and I did not appreciate their usefulness until later. She would use the same little bag she once used to hold soap scraps and repurpose it for squeezing water out of grated zucchini or cabbage. It looked like nothing special, just a bit of cloth tied up, but it was essential for making fritters, slaws, or dumplings come out right. Without squeezing, the vegetables would be soggy and ruin the dish. She showed me how to twist the cloth tightly, wringing out every drop until only the dry shreds remained. I laughed at how much liquid poured out, not realizing it was the difference between success and failure in cooking. It was thrift, yes, but it was also precision, born from years of practice. A cheesecloth bag could be washed, dried, and reused endlessly, making it one of the cheapest tools in the house. Every time she pulled it out of the drawer, I knew something good was about to be cooked. Soap saver cheesecloth bags were a reminder that wisdom lives in the small, overlooked details. Carrot top seasoning was one of those things my grandmother insisted on saving even when everyone else tossed the greens straight into the bin. She would carefully wash them, lay them out to dry, and then crumble the brittle leaves into jars that sat beside her parsley and sage. It always amazed me how the kitchen smelled so earthy when she crushed them, a fragrance sharper and fresher than the dried herbs she bought. She said carrot tops tasted just as good as parsley, and no sense throwing away flavor when it was already in your hands. Sprinkled into soups or stews, they added brightness and reminded you of the garden even in the middle of winter. Sometimes she would mix them with salt to make her own little herb rub for chicken or pork. To her, waste was unforgivable when food was tight, and carrot tops were proof that hidden value lived in what most people ignored. Even today, I still think of her every time I buy a bunch of carrots and see those green tops waving like little flags of thrift and wisdom. Scorched milk fudge base was a trick that always made me laugh because it sounded like a mistake, yet my grandmother did it on purpose. She would let the milk brown slightly in a pan, just long enough to deepen the flavor into something nutty and caramel-like. As a child, I thought she had ruined it, but when she added sugar and stirred, the aroma turned rich and inviting. This became the base for her homemade fudge, a treat that tasted like it came from a candy shop even though it was born from thrift. She said that wasting even slightly scorched milk was foolish when it could become dessert. Watching the glossy mixture bubble and thicken made me realize how clever she really was. The finished squares had a depth you could not get from fresh milk alone, a flavor that carried the memory of care and patience. It was a lesson in turning mistakes into triumphs and making sure nothing good ever left the kitchen unused. Newspaper-wrapped icebox lettuce was another one of those tricks that made me roll my eyes until I saw it work. Instead of letting lettuce wilt in the icebox, my grandmother wrapped the head snugly in sheets of old newspaper. Somehow the paper absorbed just enough moisture to keep the leaves crisp and fresh days longer than if they were left bare. I thought it was messy, but she called it smart living, since lettuce was too costly to spoil. When she unwrapped the bundles, the green leaves looked as though they had just come from the market, cool and sharp to the touch. She would smile and say, "Print never hurt lettuce," before rinsing and tossing the leaves into salad bowls. The trick became second nature, and every scrap of newspaper had value in her kitchen. Today it feels strange to think of using something so ordinary for storage, but back then it was a lifesaver. That newspaper kept meals fresh and taught me that sometimes the simplest answers were right in front of you. Leftover donut pudding was proof that my grandmother could make something magical out of anything. Day-old donuts that had gone stale never ended up in the trash. Instead, she sliced them thin, layered them in a dish, and poured custard over the top until everything soaked through. The oven did the rest, transforming hard donuts into a soft, sweet pudding that tasted better than any store dessert. I used to marvel at how something forgotten on the counter could become a centerpiece at the table. She sprinkled cinnamon across the top, and the scent filled the kitchen like a holiday morning. The pudding came out golden, spongy, and rich, each bite carrying both sugar and memory. My grandmother always said nothing stale should ever be wasted, because hunger had no patience for picky eaters. To me, it was a reminder that resourcefulness can turn disappointment into comfort. Even now, I find myself thinking of her when I see old pastries and imagine them reborn in her oven with custard bubbling around them. Cracker crust pies were a family specialty that spoke volumes about creativity in lean times. Before graham cracker crumbs were easy to find, my grandmother would crush saltines into fine crumbs, then stir them with melted butter until they held together like dough. Pressed into a pan, they baked into a crisp shell ready for lemon filling or custard. At first, I thought it was strange to pair salt with dessert, but the contrast made the pies taste richer. She said it was a trick every thrifty housewife knew when sweet crackers were too costly or unavailable. I can still hear the sound of her rolling pin grinding the crackers to dust and the way she patted the mixture into the dish with quick, confident hands. That salty, buttery crust turned into something unforgettable once the pie cooled, every bite balancing thrift with indulgence. It was not about settling for less, but about finding joy in what was available. Cracker crust pies were a reminder that even hardship could be served with sweetness. Homemade vanilla sugar was one of the small luxuries my grandmother created without spending more. She would slice open a vanilla bean, bury it deep in a jar of sugar, and let time do the rest. Weeks later, the sugar smelled like flowers and warmth, ready to sweeten cookies, tea, or cakes with something extra. I remember lifting the jar's lid and being amazed at how powerful the scent was, far richer than anything sold at the store. She said it was a way to make sugar stretch further, turning plain granules into something special. When she spooned it over berries or stirred it into custard, the taste carried both comfort and elegance. It was her secret weapon for making even simple meals feel indulgent. She never let me waste a bean either. Once the sugar was gone, she tucked the pod into another jar to start again. Homemade vanilla sugar was proof that patience and imagination could transform the ordinary into a treat. The water bath for scrambled eggs was one of those techniques that felt more like science than cooking. Instead of frying them in a hot skillet, my grandmother placed a bowl of eggs over simmering water, stirring slowly as the steam thickened them. The result was the creamiest scrambled eggs I had ever tasted, soft and rich without a drop of cream. She said it was slower, but better, and good food was always worth the extra time. I used to sit on a chair, swinging my legs and watching her stir with calm precision, fascinated by how the eggs transformed. No rush, no harsh heat, just patient cooking that delivered texture like velvet. It made breakfast feel like a celebration, even on ordinary mornings. I never forgot the way she described it. You cannot hurry tenderness. The water bath for scrambled eggs became a lesson in patience, flavor, and care that has stayed with me through every stage of life. Old coffee grounds marinade was one of the strangest tricks I ever saw her use, and yet it worked like magic. She would rub leftover grounds into tough cuts of beef before cooking, letting the bitterness soften the fibers. By the time the meat was roasted or grilled, it had a deep, smoky flavor that was unlike anything else. I wrinkled my nose when I first heard the idea, but once I tasted it, I understood. Nothing in her kitchen went to waste, not even what most people dumped into the trash. She said coffee had power beyond the cup, and every bit deserved respect. Watching her press the grounds into the meat felt like a ritual of thrift and flavor. The result was tenderness without expensive marinades, a victory of creativity over scarcity. Old coffee grounds marinade taught me that every scrap had potential if you only dared to try. It was bold, unusual, and unforgettable, just like her. Corncob stock was another piece of proof that nothing was ever wasted in her kitchen. After cutting kernels off for succotash or casseroles, my grandmother saved the cobs, boiled them, and made a golden broth with surprising sweetness. It turned into the base for soups, chowders, or even gravies that carried a whisper of summer corn long after the season ended. I thought the cobs were garbage, but she insisted they still had life left in them. As the pot simmered, the kitchen filled with a warm, buttery aroma that felt comforting and resourceful at the same time. She said it was not about extravagance but about respect for the harvest, squeezing every ounce of value from what you grew or bought. The broth stretched meals further, saving money while feeding more people at once. Even when times improved, she kept making it, saying old habits built wisdom. Corn cob stock reminded me that flavor often hides in places most of us overlook. Cabbage core snacks were the kind of thing that showed just how simple joy could be. While most people tossed the hard inner core away, my grandmother sliced it thin, sprinkled it with salt, and handed it to us as a crunchy treat. It was crisp, peppery, and oddly satisfying, like nature's version of a chip. I remember sitting on the porch, chewing those pale slices, laughing as juice dribbled down my chin. She said nothing in a head of cabbage should be wasted, not when every bite filled an empty stomach. Sometimes she served the cores chilled, sometimes raw, straight from the cutting board, and each time they tasted better than I expected. It was a snack born of thrift, but carried with pride, reminding us that simplicity could be delicious. To this day, the crunch of raw cabbage still brings back the memory of her hands slicing, her voice telling me that waste was the enemy of survival. Cabbage core snacks were proof that even scraps could bring comfort. Buttered brown bag popcorn was the kind of treat that showed how a little ingenuity could create a snack better than anything bought in a store. My grandmother would scoop kernels into a plain paper bag, drizzle in melted butter, and fold the top tight before shaking it hard. The bag puffed slightly from the heat, and the smell of fresh corn filled the room like magic. She always said it beat waiting for a stovetop pot and made less mess too. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, each of us holding our own bag like treasure, buttery stains spreading across the paper. Without a microwave, this was as close as it got to instant popcorn, and it carried a taste of fun along with thrift. When the bag tore open, the kernels were warm, salty and golden, sticking to fingers that we licked clean. It felt like a small celebration every time, proof that joy could come from the simplest tricks. Buttered brown bag popcorn turned ordinary nights into something memorable. Pickle juice potato salad was one of those recipes that made me raise an eyebrow until I tasted it. Instead of vinegar, my grandmother poured the leftover brine straight from the pickle jar into the bowl of diced potatoes. It gave the salad a punchy tang that brightened every bite without costing a dime. The flavor was sharper, livelier, and somehow fresher than the standard version, and it paired perfectly with her fried chicken suppers. She said it was wasteful to throw away brine that still carried so much taste. I can still see her fishing pickles out for sandwiches and saving every last drop of liquid for cooking. The potato salad became her signature dish at church suppers and family reunions, standing out because it tasted alive. That simple jar of juice made her seem like a magician, turning leftovers into something that brought smiles and second helpings. To this day, I think of her whenever I finish a pickle jar and wonder how she would use it. Homemade marshmallow filler was a clever way my grandmother stretched store-bought sweets into something new. She would dust scissors with cornstarch and cut marshmallows into small cubes, preventing them from sticking together. The pieces then filled cakes, fudge, or cereal bars, giving the illusion of abundance without buying extra bags. I used to watch her work quickly, each snip producing another puff that tumbled onto the counter. They looked like tiny snowflakes, soft and sweet, and I always stole a handful when she was not looking. She laughed but never scolded, knowing part of the fun was in sneaking bites. The trick turned one bag into 3 bowls worth of treats, stretching her dollar and filling our bellies at the same time. It showed me that thrift could still be playful, that making do did not mean missing out. Those little marshmallow cubes carried the joy of childhood, carefully snipped with love and thrift in every motion. Dry toast breadcrumbs were another example of her never letting food go to waste. Any toast that hardened on the counter was not tossed aside but grated into fine crumbs with her box grater. She stored the crumbs in jars and used them to coat chicken, fish, or vegetables before frying. I remember the sound of scraping toast against metal, a rough rhythm that promised crispy dinners ahead. The crumbs gave everything a golden crust, crunchy and satisfying, and no one ever guessed they came from leftovers. She said it made sense to use what you already had, especially when store-bought crumbs cost money better saved for other needs. It was small, ordinary magic, turning stale bread into the foundation of Sunday meals. Watching her taught me that nothing was ever finished until you imagined another use for it. Dry toast breadcrumbs were thrift disguised as flavor, proof that even scraps deserved a second chance at life. Peach pit extract was one of those secret tricks my grandmother used to surprise everyone. She would save the pits after canning or baking, rinse them carefully, and steep them in sugar water until the liquid carried a soft almond-like flavor. At first, I thought it strange to use the hard stone instead of the fruit itself, but the taste was delicate and unique. She stirred it into cakes or drizzled it into tea, making simple recipes feel special. It amazed me how she found value in something everyone else threw away without a thought. She called it her hidden treasure, proof that flavor often lived in unexpected places. I loved watching her tuck jars into the pantry, knowing that sweetness waited inside, born from nothing but patience and resourcefulness. Peach pit extract showed me that old wisdom could turn even the most overlooked scraps into something beautiful. It was more than thrifty cooking. It was the art of seeing possibility where others saw waste. Molasses milk nightcap was her cure for restless evenings when the house felt too still. She would warm a pan of milk on the stove, stir in a spoonful of dark molasses, and hand me a steaming cup that smelled like comfort itself. The sweetness was deep and rich, unlike sugar, with an earthy flavor that settled heavy in the chest. She claimed it calmed nerves and brought on sleep, and whether true or not, I always drifted off easier after drinking it. The ritual mattered as much as the taste, the slow stirring and soft hum of her voice filling the kitchen with peace. It was more than a drink. It was a promise that the day had ended and tomorrow could wait. Molasses milk nightcap was simple, inexpensive, and filled with memory, a bedtime trick passed from her hands to mine. Even today, when nights stretch too long, I think of her cup in my hands. Stovetop sun tea was a little invention of hers when real sunlight was not practical. She filled glass jars with water and tea bags, then set them near the pilot light of the stove to steep slowly. It was not quite boiling, not quite cold, but just warm enough to coax the flavor out. I thought it was magic watching the clear water darken through the glass, inch by inch, until it turned golden brown. She said it tasted smoother than tea brewed fast, and she was right. The jars sat quietly while the house bustled, proof that patience worked even in cooking. When she poured it over ice with lemon, the tea tasted like summer, no matter the season. It was frugal, easy, and strangely beautiful to see, a reminder that cleverness often made life richer. Stovetop sun tea was her way of holding warmth in a jar, teaching me that small tricks made ordinary days feel special. Cucumber peel relish was her way of making sure nothing from the garden went to waste. She peeled cucumbers for salads, then chopped the skins finely with onions and peppers before pickling them in vinegar. The result was a tangy, bright relish that tasted sharper than any jar from the store. At first, I wrinkled my nose at the thought of eating peels, but one spoonful changed my mind. It was crunchy, flavorful, and surprisingly refreshing, adding spark to sandwiches or beans. She said thrifty cooking was not about going without, but about finding more where others saw less. I watched her fill old jars with the relish, sealing them tight, and felt pride at how nothing left her kitchen unused. Cucumber peel relish was proof that care turned scraps into delicacies, each jar lined up like trophies on the pantry shelf. Even today, I remember the taste of it on bread and butter, sharp as the lesson it carried. Sweet potato coffee substitute was a recipe born in lean times, but remembered for its comfort. She roasted the peels until they were dark, ground them fine, and brewed them like coffee grounds. The drink came out smoky and slightly sweet, not quite coffee, but close enough to warm a cup on a cold morning. I thought it was strange at first, but when sugar was scarce and beans were expensive, it made sense. She said it was better to drink something warm and comforting than to go without. I remember her pouring the dark liquid into mugs, steam curling like real coffee, filling the house with an earthy smell. It was a lesson in making do, in finding substitutes that still carried comfort. Sweet potato coffee substitute was not about imitation but about resilience, proof that love could be poured even from scraps. I never forgot the warmth of those cups, brewed from nothing more than peels and patience. Cookie sheet refrigerator fudge was the fastest way my grandmother made candy when time was short. She stirred together a rich mixture, poured it onto a flat tray, and slid it into the icebox to chill. Instead of molding or shaping, she let it harden into a slab that she later cut into neat squares. I used to watch the tray slide in, knowing that by evening it would be ready, cold and sweet. The surface gleamed when she pulled it out, smooth as glass before the knife broke it into bite-sized pieces. Each square melted quickly, rich and satisfying, a treat that seemed effortless but carried her touch. She said it was proof you did not need fancy molds or special pans, just patience and a steady hand. Refrigerator fudge filled the house with joy, turning simple evenings into celebrations. It was a reminder that sweetness could be found without extravagance, made from what you already had on hand. In the mid-20th century, when creativity in the kitchen often stemmed from necessity, benevolent Bologna cups made their debut as an ingenious way to stretch humble ingredients into a crowd-pleasing dish. A simple slice of Bologna, baked into a cup shape in a muffin tin, became the perfect edible vessel for mashed potatoes, macaroni salad, or even coleslaw. This dish was both playful and practical, a combination that fit perfectly with the spirit of community potlucks and church picnics. The versatility of Bologna cups was their standout feature. They could be filled with just about anything, making them adaptable to whatever leftovers or budget-friendly ingredients were on hand. They were also easy to portion and serve, making them ideal for large gatherings. And let's not forget their visual appeal. Seeing rows of neatly filled Bologna cups on a table added a touch of whimsy to any spread. So, what led to their decline? Over time, Bologna itself fell out of favor as food trends shifted toward fresher, less processed ingredients. The rise of more elaborate appetizers and finger foods also nudged this humble dish aside. Rhubarb walnut. Sweet tea bread is this really unique and quick bread that takes a lot of the good things about rhubarb and mixes them in with walnuts. You have the softness that you normally associate with sweet tea here, and the rhubarb only accentuates that by a lot of levels. Fruit-based quick breads were a fresh new southern concept that really breathed a lot of life into the region. Those potlucks were getting stale and uninspiring, and honestly, everyone was tired of their local Martha or Catherine bringing over the same meatloaf for the 9th time in a row. I mean, it was good, but how good could a traditional casserole really be? Rhubarb was always paired with sweet stuff, so people decided to take it in a new direction and throw in some walnuts too. I gotta say, the trend of fusion foods really discovered some interesting blueprints. Rhubarb and sweet tea breads would become a lot more common later on in the 2000s though, and I think this laid the groundwork. In the culinary playbook of the 1970s, green beans weren't just a side dish, they were often dressed to impress. Graceful green bean bundles wrapped in smoky bacon and glazed with brown sugar offered an elegant upgrade to the humble vegetable. With their sweet and savory allure, these bundles quickly became a favorite at church potlucks and holiday dinners. The dish's appeal lay in its balance of practicality and flair. Green beans were an accessible and affordable vegetable, while bacon and brown sugar transformed them into something festive. The bundles were easy to assemble and bake, making them a convenient choice for busy cooks. They also served dual purposes. They worked as both a side dish and an appetizer, seamlessly bridging the gap between finger food and a plated meal. By the late 20th century, however, changing tastes and dietary trends began to edge these bundles off the table. The combination of bacon and sugar, once seen as indulgent, started to feel overly rich for everyday fare. Health-conscious cooking also played a role, as lighter vegetable dishes gained popularity. Liver and onions with brown gravy is one of those forgotten classics that was once the centerpiece of many Sunday suppers. Yes, it might not be the most popular dish today, but it was a beloved favorite for generations. The rich, earthy taste of the liver paired perfectly with the savory brown gravy, while the onions added a bit of sweetness and texture to balance out the flavors. Some grandmothers swore by this dish, preparing it for Sunday family meals, where it was often served alongside mashed potatoes and vegetables. Though it may be seen as an acquired taste for those who loved it, liver and onions were a comforting, satisfying meal. The recipe was simple but effective, showcasing the beauty of slow cooking and rich flavors. And just when you thought we'd covered all the forgotten classics, there's another gelatin dish on the way that might just surprise you. Keep reading for the next recipe. Cheese and pineapple skewers were a popular appetizer that combined sweet and savory flavors in a bite-sized form. These skewers typically featured cubes of sharp cheddar cheese paired with juicy chunks of pineapple threaded onto toothpicks or small wooden sticks. The contrast between the tangy cheese and the tropical sweetness of the pineapple made for an appealing taste experience that was easy to enjoy while mingling at potluck socials. This simple yet elegant dish was quick to prepare and transport, making it a favorite among church members tasked with bringing something festive and shareable. The bright colors of the golden pineapple and pale cheese also added a cheerful touch to the food table, helping to create a welcoming atmosphere. Many cooks used canned pineapple for convenience, especially during winter months when fresh fruit was less available. Despite its simplicity, cheese and pineapple skewers represented the kind of thoughtful, crowd-pleasing dishes that helped build community spirit in mid-century church gatherings. Their popularity endured because they required minimal effort but delivered maximum enjoyment to guests. In the 1980s and 1990s, when potluck spreads began leaning toward lighter, more sophisticated dishes, almighty almond chicken salad earned its place on the table. This creamy, savory sweet combination of shredded chicken, sliced almonds, juicy grapes, and a touch of mayo was a refined twist on a classic. It brought elegance to any gathering while remaining simple enough to whip up in a home kitchen. What made this salad a standout was its versatility. It could be served in a variety of ways, on a bed of lettuce, as a sandwich filling, or even scooped into hollowed-out melon halves for a fancier presentation. The ingredients were affordable and adaptable. Cooks could swap in walnuts for almonds, yogurt for mayo, or dried cranberries for grapes, tailoring the recipe to suit their pantry or taste. So, why did it disappear? As prepackaged chicken salads flooded grocery stores, the effort of making this dish from scratch lost its appeal for busy households. Additionally, shifting dietary preferences and the move toward leaner, vinaigrette-based salads further edged it out. Few dishes from the 1970s could walk the line between savory and sweet quite like this one. Sweet potato souffle did just that. It was a culinary bridge between vegetables and dessert. With its cloud-like texture, cinnamon-kissed sweetness, and the signature marshmallow topping, it offered both comfort and spectacle at every church potluck or holiday gathering. The dish has deep roots in Southern cooking, where sweet potatoes have been a staple for centuries. During the mid-20th century, this recipe gained widespread popularity as canned goods and convenience foods became kitchen staples. Marshmallows, introduced in the late 1800s and heavily marketed in the 20th century, were the final flourish, a whimsical, sugary topping that turned a simple casserole into a crowd pleaser. Yet, as tastes evolved, the souffle began to fade from weekly menus. The sugar-heavy marshmallow layer clashed with growing concerns about healthier eating. Sweet potatoes themselves survived the shift, reborn as fries, chips, and roasted sides. But the souffle, with its unapologetic decadence, became relegated to holiday tables and church cookbook archives. Funeral potatoes have earned their name for a reason. This cheesy, creamy hash brown casserole has long been a comforting dish at church gatherings, especially when times are tough. Combining crispy hash browns with a velvety sauce made of cream of chicken soup, sour cream, and shredded cheese, it's the kind of dish that wraps you in warmth with each bite. The top gets wonderfully golden and crispy, while the inside stays creamy and indulgent. While it's often brought to funeral luncheons to offer comfort to those in mourning, it's a dish that is delicious enough for any occasion. No need to wait for a somber event. Funeral potatoes make an excellent side dish to serve with nearly any meal. And if you think this casserole is rich, just wait until you see what's coming next. Another comforting classic that's just as good for family dinners as it is for a church potluck. Oyster and celery salad was a vintage dish commonly brought to church socials in the 1950s, combining the briny richness of chopped oysters with the crisp freshness of celery. This cold salad typically mixed drained canned oysters with diced celery, mayonnaise, lemon juice, and seasonings to create a creamy yet textured dish. The salad offered a contrast of flavors and was served chilled, making it a refreshing appetizer or side during communal meals. Oyster and celery salad reflected the era's fondness for seafood dishes adapted to social occasions, often using affordable canned ingredients. Its combination of crunchy vegetables and tender seafood was a favorite among those who appreciated classic, comforting flavors. This salad was easy to prepare in advance, making it ideal for potlucks. Though less common today, many recall this dish fondly as a part of mid-century culinary tradition and church community gatherings. In the days when church picnics were synonymous with indulgent homemade treats, faithful fried apple rings brought a touch of carnival-style fun to the table. This simple yet delicious dessert featured crisp apple slices, dipped in a light batter, fried until golden, and finished with a dusting of cinnamon sugar. The result was a warm, sweet, and slightly tangy bite that captured the essence of autumn, no matter the season. The practicality of this recipe made it a frequent guest at gatherings. Apples were affordable, widely available, and easy to work with, while the batter could be whisked together using basic pantry ingredients. Fried apple rings were also incredibly versatile. They worked as a dessert, a snack, or even a breakfast treat alongside coffee, and their individual portions made them ideal for sharing, with no forks or plates required. So, why don't we see these anymore? Frying, once a common cooking method, has fallen out of favor due to health concerns and the labor-intensive nature of the process. Add to that the rise of prepackaged apple snacks and desserts, and these homemade treats began to fade. Few desserts carry the warmth of tradition quite like a baked custard rice pudding. Reverent rice pudding was a staple at church gatherings, offering creamy comfort with a touch of cinnamon spice and the sweetness of raisins. It was the kind of dish that felt like home, evoking memories of simpler times when nothing in the pantry went to waste. Rice pudding's history stretches back centuries, with variations found in nearly every culture that had access to rice and milk. In the United States, it gained popularity during the 19th century, when rice became widely available and recipes emphasized frugality. By the 1970s, baked versions with eggs, milk, and sugar added a custardy richness, while cinnamon and raisins gave it a warm, familiar flavor. It was versatile, too, served as a dessert, a snack, or even a breakfast dish. But as dessert trends shifted in the late 20th century, rice pudding began to fade. Its humble simplicity couldn't compete with the rise of more decadent sweets like chocolate lava cakes or the colorful allure of gelatin desserts. The time-intensive baking process also made it less appealing in an era of quick fixes. Pimento cheese spread is a southern favorite that found its way into almost every church kitchen, making an appearance at picnics, church lunches, and family gatherings. This creamy, cheesy spread combines sharp cheddar cheese with diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and a touch of seasoning to create a rich, tangy, and slightly sweet spread that's perfect for just about anything. Whether it was slathered on crackers, served as a dip for celery, or spread thick on white bread triangles, pimento cheese spread was a go-to appetizer that could be made in minutes and was loved by all. The combination of sharp cheddar and mild pimentos was simple yet delicious, offering a comforting flavor that no one could resist. It's the kind of dish that became a tradition in many church kitchens, passed down from one generation to the next. And speaking of spreads, the next dish brings a surprising sweetness to the table, a cake that's rich in history and flavor. Stay tuned! Homemade fruitcake squares were dense, richly flavored baked goods that held a special place on many 1950s potluck dessert tables. These cakes packed dried fruits like raisins, currants, and cherries into a moist batter often flavored with spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. Baked in large pans and cut into small squares, they were easy to serve and share among large groups. Fruitcake squares were popular during holiday seasons, but also appeared at year-round social events due to their long shelf life and satisfying sweetness. Their rich texture and complex flavors made them a beloved treat for many church members. The homemade aspect highlighted the care and tradition involved in passing down recipes from generation to generation. Fruitcake squares were more than just a dessert. They symbolized celebration, warmth, and community connection, evoking memories of fellowship and shared joy. In the days of outdoor fellowship and potluck feasts, sacred summer sausage sliders were a savory favorite that combined simplicity and bold flavor. These miniature sandwiches, made with slices of summer sausage, sharp cheddar cheese, and a dollop of spicy mustard, packed a lot of taste into a small bite. Served on soft dinner rolls or crusty baguette slices, they were the perfect handheld snack for picnics and church gatherings. The sliders' practicality was one of their greatest strengths. Summer sausage, with its long shelf life, didn't require refrigeration, making it an ideal choice for outdoor events. Add to that the fact that they could be pre-assembled or set up as a do-it-yourself sandwich bar, and you had a dish that was both convenient and adaptable. Guests could customize their sliders with pickles, onions, or even a smear of mayo, making them a hit with all ages. But as tastes evolved, these classic sliders began to fade. The decline of deli-style summer sausage, combined with the rise of more elaborate appetizers, pushed them off the picnic table. Pre-packaged snack trays and sliders featuring trendy ingredients also contributed to their decline. In the mid-20th century, prunes enjoyed a moment in the culinary spotlight, and desserts like prune whip became surprisingly popular at gatherings. Light, airy, and subtly sweet, this dish combined stewed prunes with whipped egg whites to create a mousse-like treat that balanced indulgence with a touch of practicality. While it may not sound like the belle of the potluck table today, in its time, it was a creative way to transform a pantry staple into an elegant dessert. Prunes, or dried plums, were widely appreciated for their affordability and long shelf life. They were particularly common in post-war cooking, where resourceful homemakers turned simple ingredients into inventive recipes. With the rise of gelatin-based desserts, prune whip fit right into the trend of light, fluffy textures. It also offered a surprising nutritional bonus. Prunes were, and still are, known for their digestive benefits, making this dessert as functional as it was flavorful. By the late 20th century, however, prune whip fell out of favor. Healthier eating didn't hurt it. Marketing did. Prunes became saddled with a reputation as grandma food, overshadowing their versatility. Baked ham and pineapple ring was a popular festive dish that often graced 1950s church potluck tables during holidays and special occasions. This recipe featured a spiral-sliced ham baked with pineapple rings arranged on top, secured with maraschino cherries in the centers. The combination of the salty, smoky ham with the sweet, tangy pineapple created a harmonious balance of flavors that delighted many palates. The baking process caramelized the sugars in the pineapple and ham glaze, adding a rich, glossy finish. This dish was not only flavorful, but visually impressive, making it a centerpiece on buffet tables. It was practical for feeding large groups, as the ham could be sliced easily and served to many guests. The ham and pineapple ring reflected the mid-century American love of combining sweet and savory elements and the desire to create memorable dishes for community celebrations. It remains a nostalgic symbol of shared holiday meals and festive gatherings. Zucchini bread with walnuts and cloves is one of those recipes that was passed down from church lady to church lady. A staple at church bake sales, family gatherings, and Sunday services, this moist, spiced bread has been a favorite for decades. The zucchini adds a subtle moisture, making it tender and soft without being too sweet. The walnuts give it a satisfying crunch, while the cloves bring a warm, aromatic spice that complements the other ingredients perfectly. While zucchini bread might sound like a healthy dessert, after all, there's a vegetable in it, it's also indulgent in its own right. The bread has a natural sweetness and a comforting flavor that makes it perfect for breakfast, a snack, or a dessert. The combination of ingredients makes it feel like a healthier option compared to many other sweet treats, but don't be fooled. Its flavor is just as rich and satisfying as any cake. Whether served alongside coffee, tea, or as a standalone treat, zucchini bread with walnuts and cloves holds a special place in many hearts. If you think this spiced bread is a winner, you won't want to miss the next recipe. a drink that's bubbly, sweet, and perfect for any occasion. Corn pudding with creamed corn was a smooth and sweet casserole that often appeared as a comforting side dish during 1950s church potlucks. This pudding combined creamed corn with eggs, milk, sugar, and sometimes butter or flour, baked until set and golden on top. Its creamy texture and mild sweetness made it a perfect complement to savory mains, adding a gentle richness to the meal. Corn pudding was appreciated for its simplicity and ability to stretch a small amount of corn into a satisfying dish for many guests. It was a practical recipe that could be prepared ahead and baked at the potluck location or brought ready to serve. The dish reflected the era's fondness for casseroles that combined convenience with homey flavors. It was particularly popular in regions where corn was a dietary staple and represented the comfort of familiar, unpretentious cooking shared among church families. In the world of comfort desserts, few could match the magic of a self-saucing, virtuous vanilla pudding cake. This clever dish baked into two distinct layers, a fluffy vanilla cake on top and a rich, warm pudding underneath. Simple, satisfying, and slightly mysterious, it was a favorite at church potlucks where ingenuity and indulgence often went hand in hand. Self-saucing cakes date back to the early 20th century, gaining popularity during the Great Depression when frugality was key. By the 1970s, the vanilla variation became a staple of community cookbooks, praised for turning pantry basics, flour, sugar, milk, and eggs, into something that felt both luxurious and homemade. Its practicality was unbeatable. Minimal ingredients, no frosting needed, and a built-in sauce that made it feel like two desserts in one. But as dessert trends grew more elaborate in the 1980s and beyond, this humble cake struggled to keep up. The rise of rich layer cakes, cheesecakes, and decorative confections made its understated appearance less appealing. Additionally, the convenience of boxed cake mixes overshadowed the charm of from-scratch baking. In the world of comfort desserts, few could match the magic of a self-saucing, virtuous vanilla pudding cake. This clever dish baked into two distinct layers, a fluffy vanilla cake on top and a rich, warm pudding underneath. Simple, satisfying, and slightly mysterious, it was a favorite at church potlucks where ingenuity and indulgence often went hand in hand. Self-saucing cakes date back to the early 20th century, gaining popularity during the Great Depression when frugality was key. By the 1970s, the vanilla variation became a staple of community cookbooks, praised for turning pantry basics, flour, sugar, milk, and eggs, into something that felt both luxurious and homemade. Its practicality was unbeatable. Minimal ingredients, no frosting needed, and a built-in sauce that made it feel like two desserts in one. But as dessert trends grew more elaborate in the 1980s and beyond, this humble cake struggled to keep up. The rise of rich layer cakes, cheesecakes, and decorative confections made its understated appearance less appealing. Additionally, the convenience of boxed cake mixes overshadowed the charm of from-scratch baking. Baked stuffed peppers were a hearty and visually appealing dish often seen at 1950s church potlucks. This recipe involved hollowing out bell peppers and filling them with a savory mixture of seasoned ground meat, cooked rice, onions, and herbs. The stuffed peppers were then baked until the peppers were tender and the filling was cooked through, creating a comforting and satisfying main or side dish. Their individual servings made them convenient for portion control and attractive on buffet tables. Stuffed peppers allowed cooks to stretch modest amounts of meat by combining it with rice and vegetables, which was especially important for budget-conscious families. The vibrant colors of red, green, and yellow peppers added to the dish's festive presentation. This recipe was a way for church members to showcase culinary skill while providing nourishing food for their community. Baked stuffed peppers remain a nostalgic symbol of mid-century potluck creativity and shared meals. During an era when convenience reigned supreme, few desserts captured the hearts of church potlucks quite like a no-bake peanut butter pie. With its creamy, sweet peanut butter filling nestled inside a graham cracker crust, pious peanut butter pie became a symbol of simplicity and indulgence. It was rich, satisfying, and best of all, didn't require turning on the oven. a blessing for busy cooks and warm kitchens. The origins of this dessert lie in the mid-century love affair with peanut butter, which soared in popularity thanks to its affordability and versatility. Pairing it with sweetened condensed milk and whipped topping, staples of the time, turned humble ingredients into a decadent treat. The graham cracker crust, first popularized in the 1930s, added a buttery crunch that balanced the pie's smooth filling. It was practical, easy to assemble, and required little more than a refrigerator to set. Yet, as dessert trends evolved, this pie began to fade from favor. The rise of more elaborate, multi-layered confections and a push toward healthier eating made its rich, calorie-dense filling seem out of step with modern tastes. Ham loaf with pineapple glaze is one of those dishes that might seem a bit out of the ordinary at first, but once you taste it, it's easy to see why it became a beloved tradition, especially in Midwest congregations. Think of it as a meatloaf, but instead of the usual beef, you've got ground ham, giving the dish a lighter, pinkish hue and a slightly sweeter flavor. The pineapple glaze, with its bright and tangy sweetness, adds a beautiful contrast to the savory richness of the ham. It's an odd combination, but somehow it works perfectly. Served during church potlucks, family gatherings, and community events, ham loaf with pineapple glaze became a standout dish on many a dinner table. While it might not have been a typical recipe for the average home cook, it was undeniably a crowd pleaser. The balance of savory and sweet made it the perfect comfort food for any occasion. If you thought this dish was an unusual twist on a classic, wait until you discover the next recipe. It's a sweet, spiced bread that's as moist as it is satisfying, and a favorite that nearly every church lady has up her sleeve. Stay tuned for more! Potato and cheese soup was a hearty, creamy soup that warmed many church members during 1950s potluck events, especially in colder months. This dish combined diced or mashed potatoes with a rich broth often enriched with cheese, milk, and butter to create a velvety texture and comforting flavor. Onions and celery were sometimes added to deepen the flavor profile. Potato and cheese soup was economical and nourishing, easily prepared in large batches to feed many hungry guests. It was commonly served with crusty bread or crackers to round out the meal. This soup represented the era's focus on wholesome, filling dishes that brought comfort and community together. Its simple ingredients belied its satisfying taste, making it a favorite at church dinners. For many, this soup remains a nostalgic reminder of shared meals and the warmth of fellowship during the mid-20th century. The 1970s were a golden age for layered desserts, and few could compete with the indulgent simplicity of a dessert built on butterscotch pudding, whipped topping, and a graham cracker crust. This was the era of quick-fix elegance, when convenience foods met the creativity of home cooks determined to make something memorable. Blessed Butterscotch Delight was a perfect example. Rich, creamy, and easy to assemble, it became a favorite at church potlucks and family gatherings. The popularity of butterscotch pudding soared during the mid-20th century, largely thanks to its warm, caramel-like flavor and versatility. Paired with graham crackers, which were already a pantry staple, and whipped topping, a revolutionary product that simplified dessert making, it was a dessert that anyone could whip up with minimal effort. And let's not forget the charm of its layered presentation, which made it feel just fancy enough to stand out on a crowded dessert table. So, why did it fade away? By the 1990s, pre-made desserts and lighter options had taken over. The heavy reliance on processed ingredients didn't help, as health trends began favoring fresh fruits and whole grains over pudding mixes and whipped toppings. Tomato aspic is one of those dishes that many people have strong feelings about. Either you loved it or you dreaded seeing it on the table. A savory gelatin mold made with tomato juice, celery, and spices, tomato aspic is a dish that was often served at church luncheons and family gatherings. The texture of the gelatin, combined with the sharpness of the tomato and the subtle crunch of celery, made for a unique flavor profile that was often polarizing. Yet, for those who appreciated it, tomato aspic was an elegant way to serve a chilled side dish that felt just a little fancier than a typical salad. It might have been a bit of a hard sell at first glance, but once people started eating it, they understood its appeal. If you can appreciate the charm of this quirky dish, you're going to love the next sweet and creamy salad that brings a whole new meaning to the word heavenly. Got a grandma trick of your own? Drop it in the comments, hit like if you smiled, and subscribe so we can keep cooking up memories together.